Legal Talk Network. We make podcasts for lawyers. Thanks so much for joining me today. This is my first live stream, and I'm just thrilled that you're interested. You're interested in legal podcasting. So, yeah, let's get right into it. I am fairly new to legal, but very long in media experience. So, my role at LTN is primarily sponsorships and sales, and working with show partners to produce and deliver legal podcasts. So we're always in the market to add new legal podcasts to our network, whether someone's looking for us to help them produce a new show or come on as a syndicator with an existing show to benefit from our wider network. So I end up having a lot of conversations with attorneys like you who want to start their own podcast or want their existing podcast to join our network. But I say no to them a lot. So there are some issues that come up repeatedly, and I can share a few of these with you. Perhaps in this stream, our experience can save you some frustration, maybe improve your podcast, whether you decide to come aboard with us or not. So I have a few items about what works and what doesn't. So first, a few don'ts. This is a little counterintuitive, but don't talk. Rather, don't talk and 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 talk, right? Just because you have a microphone does not mean that people want to hear or want to listen to you, right? It's not a license. Organize your thoughts so that people can follow the structure of your show, the progressions of the questions with a guest. Edit your thought. That means take stuff out, right? Don't polish it like it's your acceptance speech. It's not about being absolutely perfect. It's about having a clear thought and communicating it to your intended audience. Hopefully I'm doing that today. But one of our shows, Lunch Hour Legal Marketing, Guy and Conrad the hosts, have a very tight show plan. They are deeply knowledgeable about their marketing tools. So there are tons of things that they might say about the various marketing attributes or the tools that somebody might use. But for the sake of the listener, the hosts step back, right? They prioritize the most important ideas that the listeners care about. They spend a lot of time engaging with their listeners so they know, like, this is going to matter, this is not going to matter, and bring up relevant examples like, this is a concept and I talked to so-and-so in Minneapolis about this last week, and then it's just doubly relevant for the audience. It's the filtering and the curation that creates value for the listeners, and it builds the reputation of the host. Similarly, don't listen. Rather, don't just sit back and listen. As the host, you're not a listener. Ask your guests questions. Get in there. Cut them off, right? Curate them. Our team recently worked with a podcasting client who was good at getting great guests, wonderful guests, leading, thought leaders, right? And then they sat back, right? They just introduced the guest and just went, paid no attention to, it's not that they weren't paying attention, but they felt like they didn't want to interrupt somebody who was, a judge or, a major thought leader, wrote a book. They didn't want to interrupt. They didn't want to feel rude. And the truth is that the host is the proxy for the listener who's, picking this up in their earbuds, watching it on YouTube or on their phone, right? The listener can't ask these questions. So we need the host to jump in, interrupt a long off-track ramble, stop to provide clarification. Oh, wait, did you mean this, that, or the other? Yeah. And then you've helped that listener catch up with what the guest is saying, and then they can get more out of what that guest is really there to deliver, right? Call them on the crap. I mean, lots of people are out there full of crap. Hopefully, I'm not one of them as I'm live streaming. But it's important for your own completion rate in your episode. If a guest is going on and you turn off the listener, what good was having that guest on if you don't have anybody listening to that conversation? Cut them off, right? I say something like, I've heard you, but we have other things to cover. You know, there are lots of simple ways to do it. When I gave that note to our hosts on Sidebar, um, uh, one of the hosts, Jackie, said, "Oh, I love to interrupt people," and she has been so much better after that note. The other thing you can do is draw out something special from your guest. Um, one of our hosts, Adriana, likes to talk about wine. It's not necessarily legal, but I mean, wine is legal, but the it's not necessarily on topic, but it's something special, a conversation that she can have with a host. We've had the main conversation, and then in kind of the third segment, she gives, like a little, if the host, or I'm sorry, if the guest is willing, you know, likes likes wine, likes that conversation, it's so much fun because you can see a whole new side of the guest. And frankly, it's very endearing that the host is sharing that part of themselves, but it's not necessarily outside, it's a part of, the host presentation. So as a host, you can create a reason to knock them off the script. You can make them laugh. If they say, "Well, I never thought about that," you've gotten something that other podcasts interviewing that same guest didn't get. Um, yeah, and you can ask narrow questions. Frankly, the absolute worst question is, "So, tell me about yourself," or "So, introduce yourself to the audience." If somebody starts with, "That's an interesting story," I promise you it is not, right? The host is in charge, right? So ask narrow questions. Say, "I was really interested in this part of your career," or "I was really interested in that part of your book." You can always ask follow-up questions later, but give that guest kind of a narrow path to go down. So the guest did not make the same promise to your listener that you did, right? You're putting together a show, you've got a vision for what it's supposed to sound like, you've got ideally an imagination or an avatar of who your perfect listener is. They don't. The guest has no idea, right? They know that they're trying to sell a book or an idea or a concept or bring more people to their offering in a lot of cases, to their company, whatever. But you, as the host, are really obligated to that listener to make sure that you deliver on the promise. And if somebody goes off the rails, brings an agenda, your job is to bring that guest back for the sake of the listener. So, and yeah, don't leave your audience behind. There's an implied promise when you send a podcast out into the world. And just like hosting a party, it's implied that you'll have refreshments and not be a rambling, incoherent, self-indulgent mess. That doesn't build your reputation. In this analogy, you don't need the extra food and drinks, but the people you invite in do need that. So you don't always need the explanation to, that detail from a guest, but your audience might. So they need the structure, they need the curation. The audience is what makes your show real. If you don't engage their interest and provide some structure to the discussion, you're just a guy or a girl sitting in a closet talking to themselves. So don't ignore that promise that you're making to the listener by even starting the show. So I keep using the word promise, and the promise is that you'll use the audience's time well, something relevant, something you can do it in your own way, but do it consistently to retain your audience. The promise to listeners drives the way you organize your show. It drives your brand imagery. It informs who your guests should be. It defines how you frame your questions. It defines how you reflect back to what you understand your audience wants from your show. So when you can deliver on that promise, just like in real life, it builds your reputation. Um, to test if something is part of your promise to your listeners, and will build your reputation, keep asking yourself, what do I want my audience to come away from after listening to the show? What's the takeaway? That really helps center things, because people will come at you with, oh, you should do this idea. You should interview me about my book. People you care about, your significant other, your law firm partner, your best friend, your neighbor, and you have to take all of that and filter it, right? And not take every opportunity. We have a terrific show, the Chicago Bar Association's At the Bar, and they talk about legal cases, very well-known legal cases in Chicago. And somebody had the idea, let's go do a live show and do it in a bar. The whole sound of the show is different. They talked not at all about legal in that episode, largely. They didn't talk about the cases that everybody knew from Chicago. They didn't bring what was expected, promised, right? And that show had kind of the lowest engagement rate with the listeners. And when we go back through their catalog and we go, oh, it's time to run an older episode, or we have that occasion, we look at that and the numbers are just because it didn't retain the audience. Now, if their promise was always to be in a bar and always to have a conversation that was ad hoc, then they would build a different listener group, right? And those people would come to expect it. And when they sat down with an interview, that audience would go, this isn't what you promised, right? So just keep that center in mind. And then we want to talk about motivation. So why are people motivated to listen to a podcast or a legal podcast, right? When we did our listener survey most recently, we found that people found the topics based on the title, the description, that kind of thing. They did a search, they found us. But why did they stay? It was because of the host. They like the host. Audio is very intimate, and if you can build that relationship with the listener, they'll come back. It's come up over and over again. Very famous people, well-known actors, would say, look, I listen to a host, I will follow a host, if I like them, I will let them, talk to me about anything, which kind of counters my prior point. But what I'm getting at here is that people are connected to the host. There's an emotional connection, and so they trust that that you'll help them through the subject matter, right? So yeah, they want you to curate the world through the filter that you've promised them. They are out in the world, they're curious about something, and your show might have a possible answer. The curiosity is the beginning of your relationship. So do a few things, do a few specific things. Here are a few specific things that you can do to help your ideal audience find you. So you can use episode titles, be specific about what you're going to cover. Don't use the episode number. The guest's name may or may not be a fit for your format, but include what you're going to talk about. And all of those words are searchable, right? They are all trackable back to your episode. So it's okay to be long, not lawyer legalese long, but here's two examples. Google Analytics for your law firm, whatever. Using Google Analytics to help you make better business decisions, that's stronger, right? That's something that somebody might search for and hopefully find your show, right? Write your titles in an interesting and possibly a little provocative. Um, but don't be so cute that the search engines can't find you. Homonyms never work, right? You want your relevant episode to be, at the top of those search results, whether it's in Apple Podcasts or Google or the YouTube search bar. Um, and write for both humans and the robots. So use the words you intend. Um, so yeah, I've got a couple of comments here. Yeah, so I've got such a great point. Host needs to stand out. Yeah, definitely. We want to showcase the host because of that emotional relationship, just that intimacy. And yeah, the listener experience is everything. If you don't have listeners, there's not really a lot of point in all of this. So, um, all right, let's see. Just a couple of quick numbers. I'm looking at a slide deck, and so if you want the slide deck, I'll leave my information in the comments, and we can, I'm very happy to share all of this with you. So in the industry as a whole, 30% of the listeners, according to Edison's Infinite Dial, report finding their favorite shows on a search engine. For us, it's 18% of listeners found us through search. It's still powerful, but consider that against another metric. We had 18% who already knew about us. So either they were long-term listeners, maybe to other shows, um, and yeah, so it, that is kind of the nature of being in a small industry. You might find that in your own experience putting your podcast out, especially if you're doing it business to business. It would be a little bit different if your podcast is intended for consumers. But we're business to business, so we're in a lot of ways talking to our friends, our people that we're already associated with, people we used to work with. There's lots of reasons that somebody might not find us on a search engine and have already known about us. But generally, search is a pretty big component of how people find you. So another little tidbit, and this is not a small suggestion, um, connect your show to Apple Podcasts so you're findable in specifically the Apple environment. Spotify says they're the number one podcast distributor. 90% of our legal audience, though, comes from Apple. That stat is a little bit old. We've been seeing some movement on that. It's not quite so dramatically Apple, but uh, I think it's like 70% of our audience in this last year came to us through Apple. Yeah, the robots in your podcast player that ask for an episode tell us where people come from generally, or what player they're using if it can't always get the right geography. Um, so in legal, Apple is number one. There's no second place. Legal industry seems to have a strong preference for Apple. Over 90% of our downloads come from Apple users. Now it's softened, like I said. Um, but yeah, take that time to work through the process of getting your show on Apple Podcasts. So, um, yeah, back to motivation. Listeners are motivated to listen once because of the topic or a guest that they like, right? They might find you and listen once, try it. Um, but then they stay with it because of the host. Um, yeah, the subscriber to download ratio is quite high in several of our shows, implying that the hosts have an established rapport with their audiences. Um, the 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 slide about the idea about what's important to a listener is really saying that the audience trusts the host to spend their time well with, as long as the host remember their promise to bring the personalities to the conversation. um, and probably my last point is know your well, really, don't be everything to everybody. know your audience. Test your choices by asking, what do you want your audience to come away with? We talked about that. Big or small, understand that your audience won't include everyone, right? Some of the biggest podcasters out there, um, several of you may have never listened to. So um, that doesn't mean that it's a bad show. It just isn't quite right for you. And that's one of the beautiful things about podcasting. It's very, very niched. That's exciting to me because of all of the choices out there for content. It gives you the opportunity to be you, you don't have to please everyone. You can get as deep and as wonky as you want on a topic. You're developing your shows. So think about who else wants to do this with you, and be consistent in what you deliver. So, I mean, if you think about it, that's how inside jokes work, right? They're special because they don't translate to a wide audience. Um, yeah, so if you say my audience is everyone, you'll please nobody in your effort to attract everyone. And look, I'll tell you a story. I came from broadcasting. I spent a lot of years. I spent, in fact, so many years in broadcasting that they gave me an award, a little trophy. And so when just a couple of years ago, bought a new car, and it didn't have a radio that was easily, I could push the buttons easily. It broke my heart when I realized I have not been listening to broadcast for, I think I owned the car 2 months at that point. And it broke my heart to realize that, yeah, broadcasting isn't um, isn't where I'm at. So that means that for the sake of my sponsors, my listeners aren't there either, which is why I transitioned over to podcasting. And the wonderful thing is that you don't have to have the biggest possible audience to have real engagement with them. You can talk about niche things. Niche is nice, right? So identify your listeners and talk to them, right? And don't lose hope. There are lots of legal podcasts out there, but it turns out, and if you're a lawyer, you might recognize this, that lawyers are voracious learners. They are a very hungry bunch. This is good for you as you build your show. There is audience out there for you. The legal market is not saturated, which is why we're always looking for new shows. So when we asked, what else do you listen to besides Legal Talk Network? I expected some of, the other genres that are popular in the consumer space. I expected to hear comedy, or I expected to hear, that they wanted, they wanted more news, something like that. But this is where we embrace our niche. Our listeners, made up of over 75% listeners or lawyers rather, across the network, told us that their other interests start with other law and legal. That was the name of the category option that we gave them. They want more law. So if you are a lawyer and you want to develop a podcast, don't be intimidated by the fact that there are lots out there. So yeah, we got notes that people wanted litigation in courtroom, that they wanted Supreme Court coverage, that they wanted history-based legal, that they wanted legal technology. So that creates a buffet for you, for creating a new legal podcast. That list is quite long and rich and very, very deep if you dig into that content. So yeah, put together a show to build your reputation. There's room for you in the marketplace. So yeah, I think that's probably, the big points. Use good equipment. I could add that. But I hope that's been helpful. And if you want the slide deck, we'll put it here in the notes. And reach out to me. I'd love to talk with you. I hope you have a good afternoon. Thanks so much.